Welcome to the Deep Water Masterclass. We are up at Embryo South Ings in Hull. We're here because it is a very, very deep complex. This particular lake, this is lakes 1 and 2, this goes down to about 48 foot and lake 3 goes down to over 50. But this fish is starting to inch through the marginal weed, so I'm going to shut up, concentrate on getting him in, and then hopefully show you the prize. It kicked, there he is. Come off then. It's the first one of deep water. Bosh! Got him! What an absolutely gorgeous fish to open our account at South Ings. And what we're going to do now is backtrack to the start of the session and show you how to map out the swim, because knowing what you're fishing on in very deep water is absolutely key. You don't want to be fishing on a sheer cliff face. You're going to find a nice bit of flat bottom in the right depth, and then the runs will start happening. Selecting a spot to fish on a deep lake is massively different from a shallow lake. Often I find that fish show over really deep water on deep lakes, and you can cast at a showing fish and you're in 30, 40 feet of water and you're not going to get a bite. So using a marker float is absolutely key on deep lakes, because the depth and how flat the bottom is makes a huge difference to whether you're going to get a bite or not. So the trick on deep lakes is to use 2 markers. So basically my spod rod turns into a marker rod at the start of the session. They're both set up exactly the same. I'm using the new balsa marker floats, which are really, really buoyant, quite a bit smaller so they don't make as much splash. They don't fly back up the line when you're casting out, so they don't tangle. And I'm using the little tiny stems that come in the adjustable zig kits. They let the float up perfectly, and a 3-ounce pronged marker lead on each rod. First of all, I'll cast out to an area where I know bites have come from before, and on this particular session what I've done is put 1 float out at 15 rod lengths, let the float up, found it's 22 foot there, and then I've kept that as a point of reference and cast the second marker rod around the float to see how deep it is past it, how deep it is short of it. So to start off with, I've gone a rod length past the float, so 16 rod lengths. It's hit the clip, fallen down, hit the bottom. I felt it's nice and firm there, pulled it back a little bit, it's lovely and clear, and let it up, and it's the same depth as it is at 15 rod length, so it's still 22 foot deep. So basically I've got a lovely flat bit there that is a whole rod length long, which is a long way when you're on a very deep lake, because often the depths drop away really quickly, and if you don't know what you're fishing on, you can be on a really, really steep slope which you're never going to get a bite on. So I've then pulled the float back and then let it up again, and it's come up almost next to the other float, and again the depth is the same, 22 foot. I pulled it back again, it's come up again, it's 22 foot, maybe a little bit more. Pulled it back again, so I'm about a rod length short of where I first cast the other float. It's a little bit deeper there, and it shows on the underwater map that's been done of this lake that there's a little tiny trough between where I'm casting to and the bank. So as I'm pulling the float back, I'm pulling it down into that trough. And really you don't want to be fishing on the slope that's coming down towards you, because the line angle is horrible. The fish are coming into contact with the line when they're trying to feed. Really you want to be looking for a flat bit. So what I know there is, don't fish short of 15 rod lengths. I can fish longer, but I don't really want to fish shorter. And then what I've done is basically cast at 16 rod lengths progressively further right until I've found the pinnacle that's out there. So there's like literally like a gravelly hump that comes up off the bottom, and it's actually 15 feet deep at the top of it. Now you might think that's an absolutely brilliant place to fish, but as you pull the float back, it drops down really quickly. Within a rod length, it's gone from 15 foot to 23 foot. So a really, really steep slope, and that is not where you want to be fishing. Your line angle can be terrible. If it's really, really small spot, all your bait can run off the sides of it and just leave your hook bait on top. If it was a bigger plateau, so if I cast further to the right and it was still 15 foot, further to the right it was still 15 foot, then maybe it's worth fishing on. But I know from the underwater map here that it's a really tiny pinnacle. So what I've decided to do is fish all 3 rods at 16 rod lengths, and that's just before it drops away into deep water. And basically 2 of them are quite close together, and another one is about a rod length to the right. So by casting around, it's probably been 2 or 3 hours of casting in the swim. I know exactly what's out there. I know that I'm fishing on flat ground. I know that I'm just before the drop off. That's a brilliant place to start. And this sort of stuff that I would do probably January, February time when there's nobody here. If I was going to fish this lake all the time, I'd do all my markering then. When the weed's really low, I'll just mark all the distances. I'll write everything down in my phone. I know exactly what I'm casting out on the far bank. The left-hand rod is where the house is. The right-hand rod is just to the left of the tall tree, and the middle rod's between them. Using 2 marker floats at the start of a session or the start of when you're going to do a campaign is absolutely key. It tells you so much and it gives you an edge over everybody else. Perfect. I'm going to put out about 25 medium-sized spoms. I'm using chopped boilie, the new mainline fibre, basically because I used it last time I was here and did really well on it on Lake 3, so it was the obvious thing to bring. I've got a few of the pellets. The fish basically get fed here by the syndicate managers to get the growth rates up as much as possible. It's a rule on here that in the summer you can't use particle because you're basically giving the fish salad when you want to be giving them meat and potatoes. They're not going to grow on salad, so that's why it's pellet and boilie only. So I've halved the baits with the cutter because basically I didn't know how steep the slope was going to be that I was fishing on, and half baits are brilliant for these kind of places because they just don't roll down. You know, if I was fishing a steeper slope with round boilies, half of them can end up rolling down the slope away from where my rigs are, and I'm actually drawing fish away from the rigs rather than towards them. But out there it's pretty flat all the way out there, maybe a foot of difference, so even round boilies would be staying put, but I love the halves anyway. You've got twice as many food items in the swim for the same amount of boilie, and the fish respond really well to them. And my spod is basically clipped up 9 feet, 3/4 of rod length short of where my marker rod is and where my fishing rods are clipped up. And the reason for that is the swing back of the lead. So in 22 feet of water, as I hit the clip, the lead is swinging back towards me on a tight line like a pendulum. Basically I know from this sort of depth of water that it's about 3/4 of a rod length is that swing back. So if I clipped up at the same distance as my fishing rods, the spom would hit the water where the rigs are hitting the water, but the spom isn't sinking, so it stays in that position where the rigs are sinking through the water column and coming back towards me. So I'd end up spomming 9 foot past where my baited rigs are. Now, the further out you go and the shallower the water, the less the swing back. And at 100 yards in like 5 feet of water, there's almost no swing back, so you'd clip up at the same distance. But in this situation where I'm fishing 66 yards out and I'm in 22 foot of water, the swing back is considerable. And earlier on when I had the 2 marker floats out, I cast one of the floats out at the same clipped up range. At that time it was 15 rod lengths, and you see it lands well past the float that's already out there, but then swinging back towards me, when I let it up, it comes up almost exactly the same distance as the other float, and that shows how much swing back there is in this sort of situation. So I'm going to put about 25 medium spoms out all along that area. There's 200 fish here in like 12 acres, and although the lake's not been fishing brilliant, I think it's done 5 or 6 fish in the last sort of 4 or 5 days. They're showing out there, or they were before I started fishing, and I'm confident that once they find this bait, they're going to keep coming to it. If I get a bite, I should get more than one. Second take on the pop-up rig. Fish is staying out long at the moment. I think I'm going to walk down to the side bank. I've got a net down there and see where the fish is going. Yeah, he's keeping into that bank, so I'm going to go down there and try and net him a bit closer. Nice to have a lighter rod on. I don't normally use 3-pounders, but I found actually it's really good for the casting at these sort of ranges. If you've got too heavy a rod, it actually makes short range fishing quite problematic, but these are just perfect for this sort of range, from sort of nothing up to sort of 80-90 yards, and then when you get a fish on, they're very forgiving. Got to be so careful at short range not to pull the hooks out. Lovely fully scaled, get in that net. Yes, boss, get in! Oh man, that's wicked. Well, check him out. What an awesome, awesome carp. 18 pounds 4 ounces, absolutely over the moon to get this one. And a pattern is now forming in this swim. 1 o'clock's a really good time for a bite. So I put another 10 spoms of chopped up fibre boilie out there, and then the bite came a few hours afterwards. And that's exactly what happened yesterday as well. So I now know that if I come back in this swim, 16 rod lengths is the spot. Bite time is 9 o'clock in the morning, probably until mid-afternoon. Nothing seems to be happening at night, and all those things I'll be writing down on my phone. I spent a load of time marking at the start of the session, you know, and it started pretty slow for me because of that, but I now know the swim, and that's so important. If I come back in here at any point in the future, I know the marks, I know the bite times, and hopefully I'll be able to extract a lot more fish out of it. The hardware for spodding and markering up is absolutely critical, and I see a lot of people get it wrong where they spend the least amount of money on their marker rod and their spod rod, and then they just can't marker at the range they need to. Now, deep lakes, generally you're not fishing that far out because they get deep really quickly, so casting long distance is not such a consideration. But still, if you're going to spend the money, you might as well spend it on something that can do range as well as fishing close. And when you've got a big crosswind like we have here, you know, and you're using heavy leads and stuff, it makes it more accurate if you've got a better spod rod and a better marker rod. So I'm using a Longbow X45 spod and marker for my marker rod, and I'm using a Longbow X45 spod for my spod rod. Basically, there's a little bit heavier in the test curve, and when you've got a spom heavily laden, it will cast that one that little bit further. And with those, I've got a spod reel on the spod rod, very, very fast retrieve. That's loaded with spod braid, which is very, very thin, luminous yellow in colour, and that keeps the seagulls away. If you put a spod out and leave it on the surface, you can actually bait up, and the brightly coloured braid actually stops the gulls from diving into the surface. And then on the marker rod, I've got marker braid, which is exactly the same as the spod braid, but it's a darker green colour, so if you're going to leave it out in the swim for any amount of time, it's less visible to the fish. And both of those I've finished off with a 30-pound armour called Leader. Now, what that basically does is it takes the force of the cast, because both of those braids are very, very thin. If you tried to cast them long distance with a 4-ounce lead, you would probably crack them off. So I'm joining that to the 30-pound armour cord with a 4-turn water knot. It's a very, very small knot. It very rarely catches when you cast it out there, and that's about 3 rod lengths long, something like that. So it takes the force of the cast, and the other important aspects of it is it stops the marker float from tangling when you cast out. And what I've basically done is formed a big loop on the end of both those rods. So it's the same loop as you tie for your hair rig, but it's maybe 6-8 inches long. and that means I can loop to loop on different systems. So to start off with, I might just use a lead on its own just to fill the bottom, and then I'll loop to loop that off and then replace it with a marker float system. So the lead on a stem, a bead, and then the float itself. And then I can also loop to loop that off, change the colour of the float if I want to, or take it all off, and in this case on the spod rod, replace it with a medium-sized spom, and then put the bait out like that. So I'll keep one rod out there with a marker float on, and then the other rod gets used for the spomming. I've finally succumbed to pressure from Tom Dove and moved away from my beloved Fox box onto one of the new TackleSafes, and I am astonished how much kit actually goes into here. It looks really small, but if I talk you through what I've got in mind, so I've got my size 11 ring swivels, my barrel beads and other rubber beads in there. Got both sizes of crimp, the 06 and the 07, plus micro rig swivels and micro ring swivels in there. Then all the stuff for my choddies, so I've got the chod sleeves and the no trace beads in that one. And then opening up those there, I've got all my boom sections for my cog system, and also my shrink tube and my silicone tube as well in those two. And then this one is basically my sort of naked chod stuff, so I've got some chod rigs in there, plus a couple of spare needles and stuff, a bait drill that I don't use very often, so that's one I don't go to that much. And then back onto the front here, onto lead systems, so I've got hybrid lead clips and also the TackleSafe in those two. And then in these two, I've got lead clips and rubbers in the same one, obviously matching colours of those. Obviously this big compartment here, I've got all the bigger items, you know, my hook sharpening kit, needles, my bait drills. It seems like I used to take both sizes of bait drill with me all the time, and I never used the big one, so I've scaled everything down and I'm just taking the one that I use all the time. A dark matter, one pair of scissors rather than 3 pairs of scissors. And then if I turn it round the other way, so in this side we've got some anti-tangle sleeves and some heli sleeves and stuff in there as well. And then some of the new D-rig sections that go on the back of the hook, and obviously the corks to go with the drill. And then these last few, my hook beads, which I use all the time now with a spinner rig, size 8 swivels in various guises, both sizes of kicker, medium and large, little bits of lead to poke in the bottom of the bait, and then one with all my rig rings in it, and my link loops. And then the last couple is the caps to go on the hook, which I saved from when we had the captors out to protect the point of the hook when I'm storing them. And then 2 different sizes of extender stop and the normal hair stops as well. And then finally, quick change swivels in size 8 and size 11 that I use for the spinner rig. So let's shut that up, and it's the lovely little magnets that hold it together. So a beautiful bit of kit. And then the extra stuff basically goes in here. This is one of the new compact bags. This is the 2nd size down, so not the largest of them, but I've still got a couple of the Fox hook boxes in there that I keep all my patterns of hook. I also keep hooks in the top bit there that are still in the wallets, and then underneath those I've got all my different spools in there, my floss, my hook link spools, marker elastic, that sort of thing. And basically that all fits together absolutely perfectly in there. If I drop that in the top, that was obviously made for the job, and zip up round there. They're fully waterproof as well. And there's 4 sizes of the compacts, and there's also a wallet that goes into them as well that perfectly fits each size. So I've got some overflow kit, sort of spare spools of line, batteries, that sort of thing goes in one. Then other ones I use for like my cooking gear, for stuff that I'm taking with me like suntan lotion, all the like the personal stuff, face wipes, all that sort of thing. Everybody loves a bag for a bag. They love to organise their kit. I'm no different from anybody else. Have a play around with them. I'm sure they will suit your fishing. The hardware I'm using on this particular session has been chosen specifically for this kind of lake. Last time I came here I fished my 12-foot 3 3/4 infinities at real close range, and I bumped a couple of fish off. So this time I've chosen a much lighter test curve. I've got a 12-foot 3-pound longbow X45, and that type of rod is probably a bit softer than an infinity for the same test curve, so they're a bit more forgiving. And coupled with them, the new cross-cast reels, they look absolutely beautiful. You wouldn't believe they were a budget reel. The line lay on them's fantastic. I'm using 15-pound touchdown, which means I can feel the lead hit the bottom really easily, and that's important as well. I want to know if I'm on a clear bit, if I'm on a little bit of weed or in a bit of silt. It's really important if you've got a low stretch line like touchdown, it tells you more. Because it sinks well as well, once I've put the tip under the water and sunk the line through, I'll pay a bit of line off and try and get as much on the bottom as I possibly can. The other thing about those cross cast reels, they've got a really kind line clip. And I'm always fishing against the clip, so in this situation I'm fishing at 16 rod lengths, it's hitting the clip, the rod tip is being poked under the water basically to sink the line. As the lead's sinking through the water column, remember it's going down to 22 feet, as it's sinking it's actually sinking the line at the same time. If you have the rod up in the air with a big crosswind and that depth of water, it can pull the lead back towards you. Now everybody knows I can use the top end kit if I want. I could have Bezier reels on, I could have infinity rods, but I think this proves that as long as your tackle is balanced, you can cope with this sort of fishing with mid-range kit. The rods have got a lovely battle curve. You see them hooped over when I'm playing a fish, but they'll punch a lead out with pinpoint accuracy. If you're going to upgrade your tackle, that's what I recommend. Good morning. I've chosen Lake 3 on South Ings for this particular session. There's a couple of fish in here that I'd absolutely love to catch. There was a 28-pound mirror stocked last winter that could easily go over 30, and a common has now broken through the 30-pound barrier that doesn't get caught a lot as well. So either those would be very, very welcome. But the other reason for choosing this one is it's a different style of fishing from Lakes 1 and 2. You're fishing at very close quarters here because it gets deep really, really quickly. So all the baiting is done from the bank, and I basically got here last night, didn't really have time to set up properly and start fishing, so I just put the marker float out in 2 spots that I've caught fish from before. But what I did differently on this session is I used a deeper castable sonar to see what the topography of the bottom was like, so to see how flat or steep the marginal slope was, because I'm literally, I don't know, 10 yards off the margin with both sets of rods. Found that the spots I'd caught fish from before were pretty flat, which I expected. You know, on really deep lakes, you want to find areas that are the right depth, so in this case sort of 20 to 23 foot, but are also flat. You don't want to be fishing on a cliff face. So I put a bit of bait out last night after I found those areas, and then basically this morning the fish was showing pretty much all over the lake. There's a lovely southwesterly blowing into us now. Probably the best bit of all of that is I saw a couple of fish actually show right over the bait, so just head and shouldered over the top of the bait, which means the stuff I put out last night was probably half a kilo on each area is getting eaten. Once it got light enough to do everything, basically I went around the distant sticks. On the right hand set I'm fishing 9.5 rod lengths and 8.5 rod lengths respectively, so the 2 rods are both on the marginal shelf but they're about a rod length apart, and I sprayed bait all over that area yesterday, and this morning before I cast out I've put some more bait out, because it's always better to scare the fish away with bait rather than with a rig. So rather than casting a lead right amongst feeding fish, put a few pouchfuls of bait out. The sound of that is enough to hopefully push them away. It fluttering through the water does the same thing. Once they're off the spot, then you can get both the casts out. And what I've done differently to the other session is I've still used the marker elastic to mark the distance I'm fishing, but I've cast well past the spot, not clipped up, cast well past the spot and then wound it back until that bit of marker elastic just ticks into the tip ring. And then I know I'm at the right range, and then I'll stop winding and then lower the rod down and basically just allow the bait just to come to rest exactly where it would be if I'd hit the clip at that distance. And the reason for doing that is you can cast well past your baited area. It makes absolutely no splash in the baited area, and then winding back basically allows you to drop the rig silently into the area and hopefully get a faster bite. And I will continue to adopt that during the fishing session. It's always nice to cast past the area, watch the rig in the air, see that everything's separate. And I did the same on the other 2 rods as well. So I've got 2 on the right hand side, 1 on the left hand side, you know, both over a load of chop boilie. It's a day lake as well, it does lots of day bites here. So we're hoping now, it's great weather, overcast, you know, low light levels, couldn't really be better for a daytime bite. So we're all set up ready for action. Let's see how it pans out. The fish responded really quickly to the bait, and the first bite came just a few hours into the session. Fights in deep water are always really weird, with the line pointing straight down most of the time, and eventually I caught a glimpse of a really nice scaly upper double, and just when it looked like the game was over, disaster struck. Oh! Feels like a small lively fish, same rod as before, on the pink again. Get in that net. Bosh! Got him! Oh, after a lost fish, that is wicked. Just going to transfer it into the sling. Always lift them out of the water in the sling. Check that out. What an absolutely stunning creature. Just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. 12 3/4, but who cares how big they are when they look like this? So I'm absolutely over the moon with that. If something is working on the venue that you're fishing, then you want to be swapping all rods to that, because last year I caught a ball on Mystic Spice, that hasn't done a bite, so changing over to the pink one will hopefully produce more takes. But most importantly, that spot on the left hand side is rocking now, so I'll be getting some more bait out on that. Just a few more pouchfuls of half boilies, and then another pink one over the top, casting past the area, winding it back so that line marker just clicks into the tip ring, lower it down onto the spot, and hopefully it's going to produce some more bites. But for now, I am absolutely over the moon. I've chosen to fish my rods split, 2 on this side, 1 on that side, because my spots are down different margins of the lake. If I had all 3 rods together in the front of the swim, it would still work, but it would basically mean when I'm playing fish on one rod, I could end up going through the other line. So by keeping them apart, it means when I get bites on the left hand side, I can play them away from this right hand set of rods and vice versa. So what I've done with the single system is I've taken the uprights off of my 3 rod setup and then basically changed it to a 2 rod setup. I've got the 2 rod buzz bars with me as well, which weigh next to nothing. It looks super cool just fished as 2 rods as well, which I know shouldn't matter, but it does. And then with the other one, the uprights that I've unscrewed, I've just put an extra spike in the bottom of them and just fished it as a set of single sticks on the left hand side of the swim. You can see I've got snag ears on there, which I didn't used to use, but I've been doing some real snag fishing this year where the rods are getting pulled off the rest if you don't use them, and basically I keep them on all the time now. I've pointed this right hand set of rods more at where I'm fishing, because if they were pointing straight out, what I found sometimes when you're fishing down a margin, your left hand rod goes, it pulls underneath the right hand rod and you can't get it off the rest to actually pull up into the fish. So I've learned to try and point the rods at where I'm fishing as much as possible so that doesn't happen. And you see the bobbins I'm fishing are very, very slack. These are the stow bobbins, and I think for this sort of fishing there is nothing that comes close to them. The reason for that is they're basically semi-fixed from the bobbin back to the reel. Yeah, so it's the reel that's supporting the weight of the bobbin, not the line going out there. And you'll see the bites I'm getting are absolute rippers. I'm fishing really, really close in. They always charge off away from you when you're fishing with a slack line close in anyway. So people worry about bite indication, oh, you've got a slack line and you're not going to get as good bite indication. Well, you're probably not, but I'd much rather have that than a tight line going right through the middle of the swim, telling the fish exactly where I'm fishing. So by fishing them like that, semi-fixed and supported by the weight of the reel, I think it's a major, major advantage. And you can see the line's just drooping down, really slack off the rod tip. I'm not worried that it's sitting in all the weed on the marginal shelf. You know, that's perfect line lay in my opinion. And it's so different from how most people fish with a heavy bobbin right underneath the rod. You can see the line's like a bowstring going through the swim. And I think the fish just know all about it and they can avoid areas as a result of it. So that's how I've got my rods set up for this kind of close quarters fishing in very, very deep water. I know it's different from the norm and it may seem weird to fish like this, but if you do, I promise you it'll get you more action. One of the great things about deep lakes is they fish well into the late autumn and into the winter. Right up until Christmas is a brilliant time on these sort of places. Really pleased I've got the soft rods on now, really pleased. In that net, you big fat carp. Get in! Yes! Come on! That is a real big one for this lake. That is awesome. Okay, moment of truth. Ooh, he's big. He is 27 3/4. Get in. Yeah, check that out. 27.12. My biggest fish from pit 3 by some margin, my biggest mirror by a long, long way. And there's bigger ones than that in here. There could be one that goes 30 pound. Just an awesome, awesome creature, set for really big things in the future. And from a personal perspective, I'm getting it right. That's the most important thing. I've worked out the swim, worked out the baiting, worked out the rigs and the hook baits. Absolutely over the moon. Let's give it a little kissy, as we always do. Off you go, my darling. Back to your watery home. As soon as that chunky mirror was safely back in the water, it was time to chop up some more baits. Being prepared for more action is the best way to make the most of any session. On this particular lake, I'm catapulting them out because I'm fishing so close to the bank, just going round to the adjacent bank and I'm basically catapulting them over the top of the marker float at the start of the session, and then once I know what I'm aiming at on the far bank and how far I've got to catapult them, I don't need the float anymore. I just carry on catapulting out in that rough sort of area, and with the catapult you get a really nice spread of chops, even at close range, and just creates a lovely sort of baited area. You can imagine the fish coming in, picking them off, perhaps taking the ones that are further away from the rig to start off with, and then basically moving closer and closer in until you get the bite. It's a proper little edge when you're fishing on deep lakes. Left hand rod again this morning. As you can see, the sun's come up. It's a beautiful day, and it's very high pressure, and you'd think that deep water wouldn't fish in high pressure, but certainly these lakes don't. It doesn't seem to make a difference. And if you just fished on when it looked good on paper, you probably wouldn't come on days like today, and this proves that it is still worth it. Banging its head a lot. It could be a better one, but I don't know at the moment. Charging around quite fast, which normally means a smaller fish. That net. Bosh, got him! Come on! Check his fins are flat. That one's bent back there. See the little lump. It's pushing flat against his body. Right. Here's 26 on the button. Get in. There we go. Check that out. Just an awesome complex this, and it shows that just because you've got a deep water up in the north, it doesn't mean that the fish won't grow, and it doesn't mean that the fishing doesn't stay really consistent. And I reckon this place will keep fishing right up until Christmas. The deep water just helps that so much, and if I lived closer, I'd be here all the time. Beastie. Yes. The rig I've been using on both lakes over these couple of sessions is my favourite pop-up rig at the moment. It's called the spinner rig, or the Ronnie rig, and the essence of the rig basically is a quick change ring swivel that the hook clips onto, so you're no longer tying it onto the line. It's being hooked on, and it basically means you can change it really easily. But most importantly, it spins really quickly, so as the fish sucks the bait in, it basically spins into the prone position, catches in the flesh really quickly, and a roaring take ensues. The hook links I'm using are made of hybrid stiff, and that's slightly softer than the boom material, which has become very popular for use with that rig. I just like that slightly softer material, especially when I'm fishing for smaller fish. I think it just enables the hook to get into the right position in the bottom lip that little bit easier. And you can fish that rig with a braided hook link if you want. The important part of it is that swivel can turn and catch hold so quickly. The hook link itself is about 5 inches long, and it's crimped at either end. I love crimping, I've done it for years now, and the hybrid stiff material works particularly well with it. If you tie a knot in it, you have to tie like a half blood knot or a grinner. You can't do a loop knot in hybrid stiff, it just doesn't like it. But if you crimp it, you get almost 10 pounds extra breaking strain. So 20 pound with a knot, nearly 30 pound crimping. The most important part of crimping with these double barrel crimps is when you squeeze them down, it squeezes down evenly, so it's not squashed flat. It retains the same shape it started off as, but it's just squeezed nice and tight. The crimp underneath the hook is what I mould the putty round to counterbalance the pop-up, and I use a lot of putty. I want the pop-up sinking really quickly. At the start of this session, I used a Crank X in size 4, and it was heavily sharpened, and unfortunately the first fish came off, so I swapped over to a wide gape X, again quite thick in the wire, but heavily sharpened again, and every fish since then has been absolutely nailed. The hook simply clips onto this new spinner rig swivel, which has got a different crook on the end, so you don't have to open it up, and then over the top of that I put a medium kicker that I've just cut down. It basically makes sure the hook doesn't get off that crook, and just gives a nice angle so the hook's sort of cocked over like a claw to grab the flesh. And then the bait goes on, that's tied onto a micro rig swivel, and I'll just use a series of granny knots just to basically tighten down the hair stop on the top of that hook bait, and then just burn the ends just to neaten everything up. And then lastly, one of our hook beads, and basically the point of the hook goes through that just a little way. You can then pull it off the sprue and then slide it round to basically the top of the shank of the hook. That's where I like it to be, and if you drop it into the edge you can just see how aggressive it looks when it's sitting there waiting for a take. Now that's fished on a helicopter rig, and the reason I'm using that is I'm using small hook baits which are prone to tangling but not with a helicopter rig. I've got a very short lead core leader, so it's only about 18 inches long. I cut them right down, basically because you don't need any longer than that. That bit's laying across the bottom, and as soon as you can get off that lead core leader and onto the main line, that makes the whole thing as invisible as possible. The advantage of having a lead core leader on means that it's very, very durable, so you can play loads of fish and not have to retie anything, and also it's kinder to the fish. So when you're playing the fish, it's going to be that lead core leader that's rubbing up and down the side of the fish, and I think that just reduces the risk of taking any scales off. I'm using a HeliSafe on the bottom of the lead core leader, and that's basically just done by snipping the ring of the ring swivel off the bottom of the lead core leader, or using the little swivel that actually comes with the HeliSafe and splicing that on. And then basically the whole thing slides down over the lead core leader and fits together, and you can use it to either dump the lead or keep the lead on. In this situation I'm dumping the lead because I'm not getting many bites and I want to make sure every single one goes in the net. But if I was getting loads of takes, I'd put the little collar in, keep the lead on, and if you lose the odd fish because of it, it's not the end of the world. My top bead, the no safe bead, is about 2 to 4 inches above the lead. It's a flat lead, a 3-ounce flat pair. I've cut the swivel off it just to keep everything nice and close together. And I think the fish basically feels the weight of the lead that little bit sooner if you do take the swivel off. I need a flat lead in this situation because the bottom there is very, very steep, and I don't want a round lead rolling down the marginal shelf and basically tangling the rig up once it's come to rest. Hook baits wise, I've changed from yellow on the first session, which really suited the fibre bait that I was feeding, over to a pink almond on this session, basically because that's what I've been catching on recently. It was on one rod and that rod has kept producing the bites, so I've swapped it over to all rods. And it's worth keeping in touch with the other guys on the lake that you're fishing. If something is standing out that's getting more bites, then that is the thing to get onto. There's no shame in copying successful anglers. It's always worth plugging into the local network, always make them a cup of tea, get a bit of extra information, and it will definitely get you more bites. Taking a hell of a lot of line. Little quote from Jaws there, just because I love it so much. Proper powered off this one into the deep water. Just important to be patient now, just let the tip of the rod do the work. There he is, see he's nailed. Bosh, got him! Wicked. Result. Yeah. One awesome fish to finish our deep water masterclass. I absolutely love this kind of fishing. If these lakes were closer at home, I'd be here all the time. It's so interesting, and the fish are in such awesome nick as well. I hope it's given you loads of tips and tricks to put into your own deep water angling. And remember, it may be deep, but that's where the food is.